and welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to what is going to be the first of a series of videos, and that's something that I haven't really done before. I do compile videos on similar topics into playlists, but I've never really done a project that is continued over several weeks worth of videos, mainly because I like to just start something, do it, get it finished and get on with it. But every so often I think that there's something that I would like to share with you, but it's just not feasible to do it in a single video. And this is just one of those things. Not last year, the year before, so in 2018, I made this journal for myself, this vintage style journal. Beautiful, fabric covered, nice sort of vintage ephemera, lots of sort of old pages. I used a selection of different types of papers to create this this gorgeous book that I still haven't really found a purpose for it yet. I'm unsure what I want to do with it. I'm aiming to do small artworks, I think, and pop them in there and store bits of ephemera in there as well. But I created this basically over the course of a year. I kept doing a little bit in my spare time and putting it away and then getting it back out again and doing a little bit more. And when I'd finished, I thought that I really would like to share the techniques that I'd learnt along the way with you. But obviously this is in itself quite a considerable project, and I didn't want to have to try and record hours and hours of footage, edit it down into what would still be a really long video to try and put it out in one go. I didn't want to do that. I didn't think that it's not going to be pleasant for me to do it, and I don't think that you would want to sit and watch it like that all in one go. So therefore last year nothing really came of it, but this year I've come to it with fresh eyes and decided on a way that I can break it down into segments, and I'm aiming to pop this out really in a series of 5 videos, each video covering a different section of the construction and embellishment, and hopefully make that more manageable for you to watch in pieces. That way, you know, there may be a section that's not particularly relevant to you, so you could miss that out. Today, obviously, we're doing this little intro, and then we're going to talk about the pages that are going in there. Now, if you decided you don't want this to be one of these sort of vintage style journals, that maybe you want it to be an art journal and all you want to do is put some watercolor paper inside, that's fine. You could skip the rest of the tutorial about tea staining and choosing papers. You don't need to look at that, but then you might want to come back next time to look at how we construct the cover. You may already have an old book cover that you want to use, so you might not need that section, but you want to know how to do the binding, so you would come to that section. So I'm aiming to break down this whole process, as I say, into approximately, I think, 5 videos. It should work in 5, I think. And I will put those out over the next sort of couple of months. They're not going to be out on consecutive weeks. I still want to be able to put out a bit of variety in videos, so I'm aiming to maybe put each section of this project out every 2 to 3 weeks, and with something else sort of dotted in between to keep other people happy that perhaps are not interested in the bookmaking. So they will all be compiled into a playlist. Once they're all out there, they will all be together in a playlist. But I'm hoping as well that by sort of having a week or two's grace between each video, it'll give you the time to find some materials that you want to use and sort of get on with maybe working on that section. And if you want to work alongside me creating your journal, that you've got plenty of time to do that. Just wanted you to be aware that don't think that I'm going to put all 5 videos out over the course of the next 5 weeks. It will take a little bit longer than that, but I won't leave too long between each one. So today, obviously, we sort of have just a little introduction, and I'm going to talk about the pages, really. As I say, this is a hardcover book, and it's all nicely decorated. And inside, I've used a selection of sort of tea-stained papers for the most part. There are a few, there's some book pages, and there's some music paper, there's some graph paper. There's also sort of a few vintage printable things. But we're going to have a look at tea staining today. I'm going to show you the quick and easy way how I do that, just to sort of age up any of the pages that I'm using. And we'll talk a little bit about the selection of papers that you can use. So here I've got my whole sort of pile of bits and pieces. I'm probably going to use some vellum in between the separate signatures. I think I might just put some vellum just because I like the way you can sort of see through it to what's underneath. So I'll probably be cutting some of that to size and using that. That won't require tea staining, that'll just go in as it is. For the most part, the pages are going to be made from just regular printer copier paper. Just, you know, the good old-fashioned cheap stuff that you'll buy in a pack of 1,000 sheets. They are absolutely perfect for tea staining, and we shall go and do some of that in a moment. You can also use things like graph paper. I've got a selection of different types of graph paper here. Some like old time sheets. Again, more graph paper. There's some ledger paper. You can use some scrapbook papers. You know, there's lots of lovely scrapbook papers on the market with vintage style prints on them. So, you know, you can always use those. Of course, they won't need tea staining unless they're a very bright colour and you want to dull them down a little. But I've selected a few there that would fit perfectly with the colour scheme that we're using. Some vintage music score paper. Again, this comes in different sizes. If I'm to use some of this bigger size paper, I might need to trim it down a little bit. You could always use some old book pages, maps, you know, there's dictionary pages, something like that. And I've got left over from the previous one that I've made, just some bits and pieces. Now here I've got, these are some printables, and the ones that I used were actually from Mixed Up on their Etsy store. And as you can see, that's that letter. Now I printed these out just onto the regular paper using a laser printer and then tea stained them and trimmed them down. And they worked really, really well. Just that one there, once it's tea stained and trimmed, looks like that, just plain on the back, but obviously it's got the tea staining on. I will say, if you have a laser printer, you can print it first and then tea stain it afterwards. The ink will not run. If you have an inkjet printer, tea stain your paper first and then pop it through your printer afterwards. Just because otherwise when you come to brush the wet tea over an inkjet print, it's going to smudge it. But as you can see, you can sort of print out vintage forms and letters and things like that and tea stain them. Lots of them available at various places on the internet. And then I had some other bits of papers that I actually made too many things for the previous book and ended up taking some out. So I have bits and pieces, some various quotes. Some of these might well then find their way into this new book that we're making together. So I hope you can see there's a lot of choice that you can use here. As I say, you can go all out junk journal if you want to, and use envelopes and junk mail and lots of different scrapbook papers and old book pages and ephemera. You can make this an art journal and use some sketching paper or watercolour paper, mixed media paper, or you can sort of go somewhere in between like I'm going to do and just go for a sort of vintage style journal. So there's a quick guide as to how many pages that you may need. If I bring the journal back, the spine of this one is about 1.5 inches. And I've got approximately 130 pages in here. And by a page, I mean each individual page, not both sides. But if I was counting, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's about 130. I didn't want it to be too crammed full of pages. There is room, as you can see, they do collapse down. But I wanted there to be room for me to collage and add ephemera without the book bulking up too much. So if you want to make something about this size, you're going to want approximately 70 pieces of paper, because each piece of paper will get folded in half and become 2 pages. If you want to make a narrower book, you'll use less. If you want to make a wider book, you'll use more. Really, I would just make sure you've got enough. If you've got a few too many, it doesn't matter. And once we come to assemble it, you can adjust and see whether you actually need any more or any less pages. As I say, I ended up taking a few out when I actually came to bind this book last time. So I'm going to show you how I tea dye these pages, which is a really quick and easy process, but I will apologise in advance because I'm going to have to go downstairs into the kitchen to do this, and I'm going to have to hold the camera in my hand while I do it, as it's just far too complicated for me to dismantle the tripod setup here and reassemble it in the kitchen. So if it's a little bit shaky while I'm doing it, do apologise. But I did want to actually show you the process because it is quite an easy one to do. So I shall go downstairs and I shall be back with you in a moment when I'm in the kitchen. So here we are in the kitchen. So this is probably going to sound really echoey in comparison to being upstairs. So again, apologies for that, and apologies if I'm wobbling while I'm doing it, as I'm doing this all one-handed. So this could be an absolute disaster. So I have made up some tea. I took, it's a ½ litre jug, a 1 pint jug. I've put 3 tea bags in there, put boiling water on, and I've left that to stew for about 10 minutes, left the tea bags in there. But that's going to create a nice strong colour for us to stain our paper. Now you can do this with coffee and it works perfectly lovely, makes a really nice colour, but I will say the smell of coffee then lingers on the paper. Now if you love the smell of coffee, that's fine, but maybe if you're giving it as a gift, or you're not overly fond of the smell of coffee, then tea is a better option as it doesn't leave a smell. I've got a couple of trays. These are just melamine trays, and I've put a piece of paper on each one so that I can do 2 at a time. To the side here, I've got a couple of baking trays to pop in my oven, and the oven is set at about 140 degrees centigrade, so a sort of medium temperature oven. I've got myself a nice brush, just a flat paintbrush, and we're going to paint the tea onto the paper to stain it. So this is why you've got the trays. This will just help keep your kitchen clean, hopefully, because it'll catch all the drips. You could use a plastic storage box or a large lid off something. And we're just going to paint the tea. Much easier to say if you've got 2 hands, but we will do our best one-handed. I'm going to paint it over the surface of the paper. Then just going to flip it over. Again, this is going to be easier if you've got 2 hands, but we will do our best to manage with 1 hand. And then just paint some on the other side as well. And again, we'll just flip this other page over. Doesn't move about so much when it's wet, it tends to cling to the tray. But obviously if you've got a spare hand, you can just hold it in place. So once we've done that, we want to take the pieces of paper and just pop them onto the baking trays. Just be careful because obviously it's a lightweight paper and it's a bit more fragile when it's wet. And then we're going to pop those into the oven. So just popping those onto the shelf in the oven, and this will only take a couple of minutes. So you can get your next 2 pieces of paper, pop them down on the tray, and we'll do exactly what we just did there. So this is a little easier now because my tray is damp, so the paper is going to hold in place a little bit better. And we're just going to brush that tea over the paper. And you're going to flip it over and paint the other side. We'll flip the other one over and paint the other side of that. And this just ensures that it is sort of saturated through. And so we don't want it dripping, you know, it doesn't need to be swimming, but you just want it to have covered with the tea stain. Now, in the time it's taken you to do those two, the two that we put in the oven should be done. So just bear with me. Trying to avoid steaming up the lens with this is a fan assisted oven, which then always blasts out hot air when I open the door. And as you can see, these are already dry and they've got a nice sort of uneven colour tone to them. So we can just pop those to one side, take the next two, put those on the tray, put them in the oven and continue until you've done as many as you need to do. So I shall put down the shaky hand cam now, continue doing all my pages, and I shall meet you back upstairs again in the craft room where we will be back on the steady tripod. So here we are back up in the craft room again with our tea stained papers. As you can see, I've got quite a pile. I think I should have enough for the journal that I'm going to make this time. I love the fact that we get this nice sort of subtle variation in tone on each of the pages. They all turn out slightly differently. And that's just, it just adds a nice warm, soft colour. If you want to darken the tone of the paper, try adding some more tea bags in there. Or indeed add some coffee, which does darken it down a little. If you find when you came to take them out of the oven they were still a little damp, you can always increase the temperature of your oven. You can go right up to sort of 180 degrees, no problem at all. I've just found what sort of works for me on my oven, and they all work slightly differently. The only other thing that I have done with these papers is I've given them a light press with a hot iron. It just helps flatten out some of the odd sort of crinkles that you get, but it does leave a nice texture behind still. And if there is any residual dampness, it also just helps get rid of that. But it just makes life a little bit easier for folding into signatures and decorating the pages if they're a little bit flatter than when they come out of the oven. So I hope you've enjoyed this sort of brief introduction to what we're going to do. I hope you like the idea of a series of videos that will sort of go to create a much larger project than I usually do. And I do hope that you will join me in a week or two for part 2. Next time we're going to take a look at assembling our signatures, which are the sections of the book. Each of these little folded sections in here is a signature. So we're going to look at assembling those and adding some embellishments to the pages, because some things are much easier to do before you actually bind the book. For instance, if we were going to do any stitching down the edges of the pages, that is a lot easier to do it obviously before you've bound it into an actual book. And it's same with some of the stamping, to be fair. There's a little bit of rubber stamping in here, and although you can stamp onto the page in a book, it's easier when it's just a flat piece of paper. So we'll have a look at some simple ideas for embellishment next time, and dividing your pages up into signatures. So as always, if you've enjoyed this video, please leave me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to check back in a couple of weeks for part 2 of this series. But for now, that's all. Bye.